Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Welcome to MICCI webinar on international schools, the new norm. To all our participants out there on Facebook, a very big thank you for tuning in to MICCI Facebook live stream. This is our second series on private education. It's the first series was on the 18th of June 2020 with the title Private Education Sector Impact of COVID-19. This deadly virus has had a huge impact on our lives and the education of our children. How are we moving forward? What is the new norm in education? Let's hear it from our moderator and speakers later on. Our moderator for our webinar session today is Mr. Frank Paulson, Managing Director of UHealth Sdn Bhd and member of the Board of Governors for the International School of Penang, which is more commonly known as Uplands International School. From his biodata, you will know that Frank has been in Malaysia now 25 years, but what you don't know is he is currently speaking to us from his home country in Denmark, which has got a 6-hour difference, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Frank? Frank has had 3 children who studied at the Uplands International School, with 2 of his sons completing their IB there. I will leave it to Frank to introduce our 2 speakers. But before our 2 speakers is Dr. Danny Gun, Chairman of the Board of Governors of the St. Christopher's School Association, and Mr. Rami Madani, Head of School of the International School of Kuala Lumpur. Before we start the session proper, please note housekeeping rules. Each speaker has 15 minutes. A Q&A session will be held at the end. Please post your questions on the Facebook Messenger and indicate your name, your company, if any, and who the question is directed to. And now I hand the session over to our moderator, Mr. Frank Paulson.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. And thank you to MICCI for allowing me this opportunity to moderate the webinar today. It's a new format that I'm not too familiar with yet, but I hope everything will go smoothly and with the help of 2 experienced speakers here. Education is a cornerstone of MICCI and has always been it. And being an international chamber, it's also natural that international education is in the bloodstream of the organization. I also believe that the majority of international schools, especially the established ones in Malaysia, are member of MICCI in their respective chapters. Hence, it is natural that there's such an initiative as we have today on a session that we hope will develop into a roundtable discussion following the introduction speeches. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Through his professional and enthusiastic engagement in commercial and cultural societies and organizations, Dr. Danny Gun has established himself as an icon in the Penang society. He's a chartered accountant of background profession, and prior to his retirement, he was the managing director of Kennedy Burkill and Company Bhd. And despite the claim of being retired, he's still offering himself to the betterment of Penang in a long list of organizations and societies, of which I should only mention a few. He's the chairman, as Priscilla mentioned, of the St. Christopher's School Association, a position he held since 1992. And that has seen him and the school through financial international crisis in 1997, 2008, and now a global pandemic on a viral crisis. He's also a very familiar face in MICCI, where he has been a member of the Penang and Northern Branch Committee since 2011. He is here the spokesman for international education. Today, Dr. Danny Gun will offer his thoughts on positioning international schools post-COVID-19. So over to you, Dato.
Good morning, Frank.
Good morning.
Mr. Moderator, I must say, sorry. I believe it's 7 a.m. over at Copenhagen.
Yes, it should be around that time, yeah.
Yeah, and a very good afternoon to my fellow speaker, Mr. Rami Madani, speaking from Kuala Lumpur, and to our Malaysian friends on the international schools front, hopefully tuning in to this land of Zoom. I'm also a novice here. It is obviously not easy to get your attention on what is obviously your lunch hour, but I will certainly try. The positioning of international schools post-COVID-19 is my chosen subject. Firstly, let me declare my interest. I was appointed the governor of Uplands International School in 1986 and served for 6 years before retiring upon being appointed chairman of St. Christopher's in 1992. It has been a very interesting 35 years following the fortunes of international schools here in Penang. Hence this important caveat. I'm only speaking from my experience here in Penang. I cannot speak on behalf of international schools in the Klang Valley or Ipoh or Johor, etc. But I believe that there are many commonalities that we share, and hopefully my message will resonate outside Penang too. Secondly, a short primer on the international school scene in Penang. For the longest time, we only had 3 international schools here. Uplands, founded in 1954, St. Christopher's in 1964, and Dalat School sometime in the 1960s. Uplands was founded to serve the children of the expatriate planters and miners in the then Malaya, and got the name from being located up Penang Hill. St. Christopher's was founded by several gentlemen employed by the international trading houses, which then dominated the MICCI committee here in Penang to provide an additional avenue for education for expatriate children. Hence, St. Christopher's is indirectly founded by the MICCI. Dalat, as we all know, is an offshoot of the original American school at Vietnam, which relocated to Penang in the 1960s, probably as a consequence of the Vietnam War. It was and still is mainly an American missionary school, preparing the children of missions for further education in America. All these 3 schools had a similar heritage. They were run by the community as a not-for-profit. Frank and myself, we are volunteer governors working pro bono. This simple setup continued up to the early 2000s, when the Malaysian government decided on a plan to set up the country as an educational hub for the region. It started by leveraging on the mainly not-for-profit international schools existing in the country. Recall that up to then, the international schools could only admit local children in the lower age groups. That is, in the nursery, reception, year 1, and a bit of year 2. Once the local children reached 6+ in age, they were obliged to leave and start Standard 1 international schools. As the education hub idea grew, the Ministry of Education saw the opportunity to grow international schools by meeting the local demand by parents for their children to be schooled in English. At the same time, children regionally were encouraged and invited to schools in Malaysia where they learned English and were prepared for an international tertiary education. From the early 2000s, existing international schools were allowed to enroll local children up to 40% of the capacities. This created a mini boom of sorts in international schools and caught the eyes of business entrepreneurs who went into the business of international schooling, all done for a profit. The MOE issued the required licenses, and it is believed that more than 100 international schools are operating in Malaysia with a big multiplier effect on the economy. Here in Penang, the 3 original not-for-profit international schools were soon joined by 4 new for-profit international schools, and over the past 2 years by 2 more, making a total of 9 international schools now here in Penang. Another is reported to be opening its doors this coming September, making 10 international schools by the new academic year. And what great timing, you must say. A growing international school scenario is stretched to the limits by bold new entrants. And we have now COVID-19. Now, all schools have since closed when the original MCO came into effect on 18 March 2020. While examination classes in national schools reopen on 24th June, international schools are scheduled for their summer holidays soon, and in the case of my school, from this week, thereby closing the 2019-2020 academic year. Will they reopen as planned in late August or early September as scheduled? Only the virus can tell. But the international schools will reopen sooner or later, and they will quickly see some game changes. Here is a short list. A. The traditional market supplied by the children of multinational corporations, what we call MNCs, and their employees will invariably see a decline. Contemporary business restructuring forced by the oil and gas bust a few years ago had adversely impacted international schools in the Klang Valley. Rami may remember that. To that, we must now expect a similar serious consequence of post-COVID-19 to rear its ugly head. As the Western nations rush to try to realign global supply chains in an attempt to return manufacturing to their roots, so to speak, in the countries of origin, and therefore reduce dependence on China and the East, which inevitably includes the portions of the manufacturing processes which have snaked their way into Penang's famed E&E manufacturing powerhouses. We anticipate reductions in the expatriate families out here, and this will be effected without international replacements, all in the name of cost cutting by the MNCs. So on that score alone, we expect less expatriate children for international schools. B. A subsector of the expat market comprises children from regional countries, including East Asia, who are sent here to have an English education. Border controls and existing quarantine rules are making it difficult for them to return. Economic factors caused principally by the aforementioned deglobalization process may further push the decline. Again, what we'll see will be less expatriate children for the international schools going forward. C. Some local children, which now form a majority of many international schools, may not return come September. Or they may, but only to leave after the first term to join national schools for the new national school calendar of 2021. This, I feel, is inevitable because many of the so-called above average income households who send their children to international schools may see a reduction in their family incomes, which will be affected by things like salary reductions, job losses, and other gloomy outcomes caused by the ongoing pandemic. Those who are not so affected yet may worry about what prospects will be like come next year or the next. Will they continue to enroll their children in international schools, which in all probability will cost them up to ringgit million a child from nursery to year 13? And that is even before the cost of tertiary education. So some may consider a change to national schools, and therefore less local children will attend the international schools. These three main factors will drive the market for places in international schools downwards. Will it be down by 20%, 30%? Your guess is as good as mine. Already, many international schools are not even breaking even. Can they tolerate further financial bleeding? And what is the effect of new international schools opening up now or next year into an already fully stretched and weakening market? Will this not drive the industry further south? What about the effect on pricing? Here we talk about school fees. Some desperate operators may resort to fee cutting, what we call discounting, etc., in a bid to fight for market share. It is therefore clear that enlightened boards of international schools must consider all this in a critical light and plan accordingly. As is often the case, branding and a solid established reputation is key. When parents have a plethora of choice, free market forces will reign. Parents will go for what they consider to be the best schools and at prices that will suit their pockets. Only the strongest international schools are likely to survive the next 3 to 5 years. It will therefore be incumbent on international school boards to review their options, marshal their resources and strengths, and attempt to dominate their marketplaces. With the negative market forces in play, none can expect, nor will they have a commanding presence. The well-established, and I would imagine the non-profits, may appear to have a better wicket since they don't have to show a profit, and therefore no returns and dividends to shareholders. Pricing, seen as elastic, may end up as the main determinant. This then calls for a strong balance sheet, because only the strongest will survive. That's my opening statement, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dato. Not a very bright future for us, but thank you for laying the ground for it. We know what we are facing. It is now my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Rani Madani. And he is an educational leader with more than 25, at least 23 years of international experience in international schools across 3 continents, namely Europe, Africa, and Asia. He's been providing strategic consultancy services to international schools throughout the Asia Pacific. He's currently the head of school at International School of Kuala Lumpur. And this is also a school where he's previously held the position as Director of Learning for 7 years, a solid foundation in Malaysia as well. We are very fortunate to have him with us today, where he will share some of his vast experience from international schools in a Malaysian context. Mr. Badani will open by enlightening us on why schools should see the crisis as an opportunity to transform learning. Over to you, Rani.
Thank you very much, Frank, and good day, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us. I would like to start by, as my colleague did, thank MICCI for their generous invitation for us to have this important conversation in this time and age. Also, in particular, thank you to Priscilla, to Chitra, and to Sean for their guidance throughout this process. I'm really privileged to be today with my colleague, panelist, Dato Danny Goon, whose vast experience was actually speaking for itself by listening to him earlier on. And the same with the moderator, Frank Olsen. It's a pleasure to have had a conversation with you earlier and to spend time with you today. I would like to focus, as the moderator said, Frank, my talk about a bit an optimistic approach, and it might be a naive approach. I totally agree with everything Dato Danny said, and I think he portrayed the picture in a valid way within Malaysia and possibly globally, the challenges that international schools. I would like to approach my talk for the coming maybe 13 minutes from a vision and learning perspective. Listening to what Dato was talking about earlier makes it more important for schools to distinct themselves to be relevant for their constituents, for their communities. This is a variable that is within our control. And the recent global crisis highlighted, in fact, augmented for each school their strengths and their weaknesses. Schools that have positive, agile culture could adjust quickly. Schools that have faculty who are self-directed and motivated did well. Schools who may be challenged with technology, with tools, with adaptability. The current crisis augmented those challenges. And I would just like to say to us, leaders, to just listen and observe what's happening, observe what qualities made you succeed and what qualities inhibited you. And I would like to talk more about those and use them as a vehicle to transform schooling and transform learning for the future. I have to say, from my experience with doing training in international schools and being at ISKL, which is a great school, this is a non-for-profit school as well, a school that is 55 years old. ISKL has been established since 1965, initially to serve the expatriate community, but over time it became a truly international school that is open to all. And we currently have 68 nationalities at ISKL. And that increases the vulnerability, as you know, from the job market and from the economical situation. However, as always, we're proud to be mission-driven and to be a school that is always envisioning the future. And I think when we look at the transforming learning and transforming schooling, some of what we have observed recently validates what we already know. For example, we know that hierarchical organizations that are top-down heavy, where people don't have the autonomy and the ownership to take risks and to continue to learn and evolve, this structure, we knew it's not going to be responsive to crisis, to global issues. And that was validated through that process. Schools that are more about networks of empowered teams that are mission-driven, value-driven, purpose-driven, that are always learning and evolving whilst being true to their mission, true to their values, have proven to work well throughout this crisis. So this is a validation of things we already know. The advice that I would suggest for schools at the moment, humbly really, is listen to your stakeholders. Don't ignore any stakeholder. Understanding the market, whether it's a business or whether it's a school, is essential. If we don't understand all aspects of our market, including internal, from the educational staff, the non-educational staff, students, parents, the financial situation around us, the economy, the safety, if we don't understand, we cannot lead effectively. So number one is we need data. And the best way to envision schooling for the future is what quality data you need to look at for students, for parents, from different stakeholders, and analyze it and share the data. Be honest about your weaknesses, be honest about your strengths. I deeply believe that schools that will survive and do well, in some cases you need to right size. Like the loss of enrollment doesn't necessarily mean that you are failing as a school, but you need to right size to manage the financial implications so you can survive the challenges over time. There are three modes of learning that are crucial for schools who want to survive and see the future. The one way we know it, face-to-face, the campus experience, the method that we have been used to for thousands of years, but in a way that is better than what it used to be. And I will talk about that in a minute later. Secondly, is the virtual learning. Although the crisis hopefully will be over in some ways, who knows, we may need to close the school at some point for a reason or another. Even if we don't have to close the schools, there is merit behind some elements of virtual learning to continue as optional ways of learning for students. So this should not be seen as a deficit, but if implemented well, not to replace face-to-face, not to replace on-campus learning. In-person learning is essential for young learners. We deeply believe that learning is a social enterprise. Kids need to have that experience. As schools have witnessed, if you transition to 100% virtual, it's not going to replace the face-to-face. Parents are under more pressure and more stress, teachers and schools. As I've mentioned earlier, although we have thousands of years worth of knowledge in face-to-face, in-person learning, we really have 3-4 months experiences in virtual learning globally at a large scale. But there is an element of it that needs to continue as option for those who benefit from that mode of learning. We know as adults, we really learn from reading, from videos, from articles. We learn in a way that is virtual to continue to grow. Our kids need that skill, not as a substitute, but as an addition. And the third way for transforming schools and learning is a hybrid model. The hybrid model is a way for us to understand that some learning is best learned on campus and some might be learned virtual. The crisis, as Datogun said, although financially maybe 3 to 5 years, I believe in terms of learning, it's going to be more than that. Some schools will survive it and continue in the way they have done it for hundreds of years. Yes, they will. Some schools, especially if they are committed to preparing students for life, that commitment, we're not talking about preparing students just for university or just for work, preparing them for life. This is a very ambitious mission. To achieve it, the commitment need to match it. And I deeply believe that these 3 modes of learning should not be forgotten when we are back on campus. None of them should be seen as a substitute for the other. Each one of them, whether in person, 100% or virtual or hybrid model, where like in math, some things I can view, my teacher record screencast for me, I can view it when I'm stuck. And then I'm in class having these debates, these conversations with my teacher, with my colleagues. This way of thinking is important for us to nurture and to cultivate. Some of the, I mentioned what happened to us, validated some things, but introduced new learning. I would like to talk about some of the new learning that us and some top tier schools, some committed schools have observed from the last 3 to 4 months. One of the things through going 100% virtual, you look back at the learning in face-to-face in a classroom. We need to pare down. We need to rethink sometimes what are the essential concepts, essential ideas that we need to secure, and methods of flipped classrooms that could help kids to be more engaged in an authentic learning experience that adds value. Some of the authentic learning experiences we are providing at ISKL are to do with agency. Students decide not only on how, when, and what they are learning, but why they are learning it and exactly what they are learning. So there's an element of following their passion to develop competencies in areas that make the world a better place and structure the learning around it rather than a traditional timeline, traditional clock schedule, and traditional grouping by age. There is a way of grouping in middle school, for example, by passion, by interest for some of the time, with guidance, with structure to develop competencies in areas that make the world a better place. In the high school, we have similar programs in a range of grades where we call it pathways. These pathways, again, students are offered a wide range of choices that allow them to have internship, to learn competitive academically. We believe that schools are preparation for life, but also schools are life itself. That's what you will see. You will see a wide range of learners. For schools to survive, the schools need to cater to the needs of all your learners appropriately. So we offer, for example, at ISKL and many other schools, highly rigorous academic, the most complex IB subjects, different higher level, etc. To really learning for an inclusion for students who have learning differences, who need specific programs for them and anything in between. And we're proud of all that we offer. Some of the new realizations that we have also noticed that our teachers reported, they gained more confidence in the way they are teaching and selecting activities. Some of the methods that have proven effective over the past few months in assessments, for example, instead of wasting too much time collecting and doing it in a traditional way to collect assessment and provide feedback, the virtual learning allowed us to do it more effectively. So teachers report, even the way we assess and give feedback on students, we have learned from the virtual learning components that will help us when we go back on campus. Other issues that teachers reported is the importance of partnership between the parents, the teachers, and the students. Although the virtual learning was taxing for parents, especially if you have young kids, who would want it if you have full-time job, young kids, and the school is working virtually? Having said that, for parents who are interested in knowing more about what their kids are learning, have benefited a lot from this partnership. And I think schools need to develop training programs for parents in an optional way. Not every parent is free, not every parent is interested. But the more we add value to what we offer and how we teach, the better we survive and the bigger, more mission-driven we can be. So if I can summarize my points before I conclude, it's important for an institution envisioning the future to be clear about where is the North Star. Where we, as a purpose for the school, we are preparing kids for their lives, not ours, not only for college. And for that value and that mission to be understood by everyone in the organization, not only the top, it's important not to think hierarchically. Yes, decisions need a hierarchical flow chart or so. However, think of networks of people who are motivated, empowered, self-directed. Decisions in a crisis situation, you can't take months and months and months to come up with a decision. Decisions have to be made fast, quickly, to improve learning, to improve the mitigation measures that you need to do. And lastly, technology is essential, as we have seen, whether we go back face-to-face or not. These competencies are essential for transforming schools to help kids lead a life that make the world a better place, make them feel they are complete as individuals and that are making life better for others. With that, I finish my initial talk and I will hand it over to Frank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. It was really nice to get a little bit of fresh air into the gloomy outlooks. There are obviously some opportunities, but it will require a lot from organizations to adapt to it. One thing that came to my mind when I was listening to these initial talks is, are the international schools in Malaysia better equipped than the national schools towards a crisis like we are facing at the moment? I know from my own kids that e-learning has been part of the education for many years already, with Google Classrooms and interactive e-learning in many ways, and communication with students and parents through various platforms and homework on submission, whatever. My impression is that that's not the case in a lot of the national schools. So could there be a role for international schools to actually lead the way here in reforms in Malaysia? Because there's a lot of talk about reforms needed in national schools in Malaysia. Do you have any comment on that, Rami?
Thank you, Frank. It's a great question. And a few comments, really. We have established a partnership program within KL between ISKL and several local Malaysian schools. It started with a dual language program, which is a program organized by the Ministry of Education to improve the usage of English in Malaysian schools, but it morphed into more about pedagogy, about mindsets, about technology integration, differentiation. And this is our fourth year, starting our fourth year in this partnership. I do totally agree with you, Frank. We have that responsibility to give back, to share. And I do agree with you that with your hunch, we are in a better position in international schools for a few reasons. One is we have a lower ratio, student-teacher ratio. We have facilities that allow us to achieve the desired outcomes more efficiently. And we always feel, I personally feel, if I'm teaching to 20 students is different than 40. So we're really learning from that experience and humbly partnering with them through them visiting us, observing classrooms, sharing pedagogy, sharing resources, ideas, to us visiting their schools to see the reality and to learn from their experience as well.
Thank you very much. Another thing that, Dato, you mentioned about the upcoming of a lot of new schools after year 2000 in Malaysia, a lot of for-profit schools. And the three of us, I mean, we can join forces on something, but trying to be objective here, is there a need to have in international schools a little more of evaluation of quality before a school is granted the right to operate, or is it all about quantity? Is it so important to have international schools that any school will do with any curriculum, or do we need maybe some self-governance in terms of what kind of schools are good for the Malaysian society? Do you have any comments on that, Dato? Oh, you will need to unmute. Yeah. Okay.
It's interesting the point you raised about quality control. Speaking from a structural viewpoint, we are all licensed and regulated by the Ministry of Education, MOE, private education sector. But I have to say that they do not show more than a passing interest in our existence. They only come to play if there's a complaint. Unfortunately, we have not reached that standoff in our case, or when schools need to increase their school fees. I think all of us are familiar with the process there. And of course, in the recent beginning of the pandemic, we heard a lot of stories about parents of international schools in Kuala Lumpur running petitions and so on and so forth, trying to get the ministry to intervene on fees for at least the third term of the current school year. So we hear about that. But other than that, there's very little interaction, which leaves me to speculate that we are just left to exist on our own. But having said that again, I was very surprised early last year when a team from the MOE came to conduct what they call an audit. I will not go into great detail on what they did. And I believe they did the same for the international schools in Penang. But very quickly after that, they came back and proudly announced to us that St. Christopher's was awarded 6 stars. And of course, I didn't know what to make of it when our principal, shall we say, shared the good news with the Board of Governors. And the next question was, who else got 6 stars? And the answer was, well, not to put it official, but none of the other Penang schools got 6 stars. So we are all very complacent and proud, and the matter died there. Now, having said that, the international schools have got their own agenda insofar as quality control is concerned. Yeah, St. Christopher's is part of FOBASIA, of which I think Uplands, you're very familiar with that. There's the Federation of Federation of British Schools in Asia, FOBASIA. Yeah, it's an offshoot of the old FOBASIA. Now it's Asia, not Southeast Asia. And there are a lot of internal programs within FOBASIA schools, which is basically British international schools in Asia, which does a lot of good for teachers and for staff, and also lifts morale with lots of training programs which we all share. Of course, all that has come to a full stop with the pandemic. But having said that, FOBASIA requires its member schools to undergo inspection every 3 to 4 years. And we on our part have done our second inspection, fortunately, in February this year, just before the pandemic. Our first inspection was done 3.5 years ago, and by Ofsted, which is the British school regulators, and they did have a very glowing report, which is on our website. And while they're giving us a verbal commentary on what they have found this year, they have not given us the official report. Maybe it's a result of what the pandemic is doing to everybody, but I can safely say that the British international schools who are part of FOBASIA are expected to have inspections by Ofsted and its related parties about 3 to 4 years, every 3 to 4 years. And that is a first step towards a little bit of quality control.
Yes, thank you. So I believe that all the established international schools have their own systems in place to ensure that they follow. So that could be the CIS accreditations, or it could be IB, or there's a lot of audits going on and quality control that are self-regulated within the associations that we belong to. There's some interest from the audience in terms of how will international schools handle teaching of sports, physical activities, art, music, and generally the concern about how is this social aspect that normally is part of school. You touched a little bit on it, Rami, but do you have any comments on how you're going to actually handle this under the new SOPs that are set up?
Thank you, Frank. That's a really important aspect, of the schooling experience. Maybe 3-part reply. Number one, we don't want, nor will we do, to accept to diminish the learning experience of our students. So we have to find solutions. That's given. So that's a mindset issue. The second is, our hope is that the MOE will make some exceptions to international schools when they visit, and they have not yet visited us because we are no longer in session now, we have that break. But we are in contact with them to allow us to operate the non-contact sport activities where kids can maintain social distance. Because the facilities we have, as many other international schools have, are large. So our hope is that there will be exceptions from MOE to international schools, because they do inspect, and if you have, for example, they say don't use the cafeteria or the canteen, but they make exceptions if they find you have a large space and you can arrange safely and social distance. So we are relying on reason here, and we're being optimistic. And the third one, given the mindset of never diminish the learning experience of your students, is it's what our PE and art and music teachers did during the virtual or e-learning. They really converted everything virtually. It's not the same. Honestly, we have to accept. We can't brag and say it's the same like students are together in one place, but we didn't stop them. In fact, our music classes took part in a global presentation called To Unite that took place a few months ago with big celebrities like Oprah Winfrey and so on. And that was a boost for our students. So on one hand, yeah, you have to do all the choir and the instrumentation with highly sophisticated technology and editing and programming virtually. On the other hand, You have the world as a platform. You are with the biggest farmer presidents. They perform to farmer presidents and part of it, and big celebrities and thinkers, global thinkers. Similarly with the PE, we have developed plans for individual competitions, meeting your growth target and grow over your growth target, and then network of people who can compete virtually. It's not the same, but here we go. We're doing our best.
Thank you very much. Another concern or comments from the audience is that we have potential to recruit from neighboring countries. I mean, of course, they are in the same situation as we are, but there are countries that probably feel more insecure at the moment than we do in Malaysia. But some of the restrictions that we face on immigration issues, visas for teachers and students and dependents, parents coming with their students to Malaysia. Datu, do you have any comments on how the situation currently is for visa handling, and are we being compromised, or are we in a good situation at the moment? It's a little up and down over time, I know.
That's obviously a very grave concern, Frank, because as you know, most of the international schools employ foreign teachers on contract. And in the case of St. Christopher's, most of them are on 3-year contracts. And it's got to be said that these teachers are basically young, out to see the world. However much we love them, however much they love us, they are not going to stay too much longer than 3 or maybe 4 or 5 years. They will finish their contracts and go to some part of the world in Asia and spend a little bit of their life somewhere else, see? So we are used to this concept of recruiting international teachers every year, and almost 1/3 of our teachers leave, on that cycle. Of course, we also have another group of local teachers, but that's another story. So, well, fortunately for us, for 2021, somehow many of our current crop of leaving teachers decided to stay. Maybe they had news of the pandemic, I don't know, but they decided to stay. So we only had a small number of new teachers coming, of which 2 of them we recruited from international schools in Kuala Lumpur. Again, another spot of luck. They're already in the country and they are licensed as it stands. So the result is that we were a bit wondering about what is going to happen to our new teachers coming from England. But the good news is that about 2 weeks ago, the ministry approached us to ask us to submit the applications for the licenses. And yesterday we heard that they have been processed. So it's not all gloom and doom now. The ministry is aware and they are taking positive action. That's all I can say for the time being. Yeah.
Sure. Do you have the same feeling about parents and students, that it's not a problem for new parents, students coming into Malaysia?
Oh, this is, well, that's the other development I was talking about earlier, where children who are not Malaysians and who have left the country with or without their parents will have difficulty coming back in the current international border restriction scenario. And we do not know when international borders will reopen. Yeah, I also need to say that, referring to your previous question, even if the ministry has approved our new teachers coming in, we still do not know what the position will be when they're actually allowed to come in. Do they have to go 14 days quarantine and that kind of thing? Will they be quarantined in KL or can they be quarantined at home? All these things are a little bit of an unknown. But for the children, there's less news. And I can't say that no news is good news, because there's less news. The ministerial bodies looking after this have yet to make their announcements, at least to the best of my knowledge, they've yet to make their announcements. So we cannot really hope for the second leg of the international students, basically, which are the children of, sometimes we call them East Asia, who have come as a group, sometimes with a single parent, some without a parent, and they bought with local families. They are at the moment a little bit of a question mark, I'm afraid.
Yeah. There's also some concerns about what if this situation carries on or there's a second wave, and what will happen to tests and results. I think it's both related to national school and international schools. And again, I think that the international schools, we have an advantage here, because I know from Uplands, and it must be the same for you in ISKL with the IB diploma, that these international organizations have things in place already. This has nothing to do with the COVID-19, but because it's an international organization, there's always a country that's in war or have a natural disaster or something. So there are ways of evaluating students, even if they are not sitting for an exam. And all these things have already been in place, and therefore students are being evaluated on a very comprehensive basis. But that will, of course, be very different from schools that are not part of some of these international organizations. IB, Fobesia could probably help also, and a lot of other organizations, but small independent international schools would definitely have problems here. And again, it could probably be something that the national schools could look into, because there will, I mean, we know in Malaysia also that there are always flooding in certain parts of the country that will be utilized. The schools will be refugee centers, and schooling cannot happening and so on. So it might be something that, again, the international schools can actually take a lead in showing. Do you have any comments on that, Rami, from your experience with your exams this year?
Well, it is true that the IB did exactly what you said, Frank. The IB exams didn't take place, and the IB has a three-way method to predict the results. And in a few days, we will know these results, and schools will have to share them with the students and the families. Hopefully will go well. The method the IB used to predict the results is, number one is the in-channel assessments that were moderated by the IB. Number two is the teacher predicted grades of students. That's part of the IB process. And number three is they use their historic data and extensive analysis of correlations between a range of grades within a school, within different schools, over time as well. To what extent could international schools collaborate to prepare and support each other moving forward? This is really an interesting question. I know that like-minded, what I see that schools like ISKL, we are one of 6 sister schools that are in other countries. We have a sister school in Bangkok, in Taiwan, Jakarta, in Singapore, and in Bangkok. Those 6 IASs, we call them IASs schools, share a lot with each other to prepare ourselves for the future. We are like-minded, we're non-for-profit, and ISKL is open to similar partnerships with like-minded, non-for-profit. We need to agree on the values that we are after and a commitment to transforming lives for the kids we have. I also wanted to add a few thoughts, if you allow me, Frank. A good news to share with Dato Danny that MOE started issuing work permits. So our new teachers received last week, not all of them yet, but I think half of them. And there is more to come over the coming few days. So that thing looks like going to be sorted. So that concern hopefully is not an issue for international schools. I do agree with parents and students. You know, there is a concern. We are in regular touch with our new families, doing conversations with them, Q&A sessions, etc. And I think the commitment that international schools could do to support families who cannot come is to really guarantee high quality e-learning until they arrive, but not to really say, let's hope for the best, let's be positive. That doesn't really, is not enough. We need something tangible and to be committed to. We have on average 10%, especially this year, 10% turnover of teachers. And luckily it's going to work well for them to be on campus in time. I hope I'm trying to answer your earlier question. There are opportunities for international schools to work together to overcome the challenge. I deeply believe readiness is the key in being agile and not being rigidly successful in one mode of learning. As I mentioned, the 3 modes are essential. One day, the ministry may tell us you need to close for a week. The numbers are high. After that, open. After that, no, the density of students is too high in a classroom. You need to bring it down. We don't know what's to come. What's in our control is our readiness. And the more we are ready, providing high quality value and able to just adjust, able to say today is this method, tomorrow is that, the day after, and excel in every method. That's the key.
And there's another question from the audience here. How easy or how much learning can we take out of this current crisis? I mean, we are being given SOPs at the moment, and they can change from day to day. But in terms of the internal learning, is it something that is being written into the policies, rewriting of school policies to be able to handle? In most schools now are having risk assessments and having safety of school and so on. So all the policies, are you already into this kind of rewriting?
Yes, Frank, we are, and these are live documents. As you rightly said, things may change. So the intent is to share it with our parents in maybe 3 weeks from today. Our plans for the entire of next year, which is a portal, a web-based way of sharing it, which allows us to update it. And from the logistics to movement on campus, to how social distancing looked like, what's possible, what's not at any given day, to really learning. And that's the exciting part. What learning did we acquire that changes the policies around teaching and learning? And the feedback that we gathered recently from teachers has been overwhelmingly positive in showing us new avenues, new potential, new learning opportunities for our students. I also believe that, you know, by providing teachers some level of autonomy and listening to them, that doesn't mean do what you want. We get the best policy outcome possible because they are on the ground. When policies come top down, they tend to be about behavior, they tend to be about discipline, about safety. But when we listen to our teachers, we know more about learning, and in that lies the transforming the future of learning. It cannot come from someone who's so distant, such policies from the ground.
So we have touched on the resources that are founded in our students and teachers and that whole learning skill. There's another concern that relates to our standing operating procedures is the facilities. How do we utilize the facilities if social distancing requires that we have to have less students in the classroom, and how do we utilize it? I know, Dato, that St. Christopher's has in the recent years expanded the facilities a lot, but there will still be some challenges. Have you thought about, is that going to extend the teaching day, or how are we going to handle these things?
Well, Frank, to be honest with you, reading the SOP the first time and trying to distill the contents is not very useful from an international school point of view. Our parents support us by sending their children for an all-inclusive education, a holistic education. It is not just learning in the classroom. And that is what everybody is missing now in the last 3 months. And nobody knows how soon it will be before we are allowed to go back to what we used to do again. Yeah, but we are coping under the circumstances. And just for example, we used to have St. Chris have talent time among our children during June. And this year it was all done online. And I watched the events and everything. And it's a bit of a a damn script, I must admit. And I'm sure nobody disagrees with me really. So talking of open spaces and enjoying facilities, we have set up mock classrooms and mock facilities. And only yesterday, some of the governors went to school and we went through look at things with the management team. And of course, the sad conclusion is that you really cannot do anything in the open for the time being. Although in the back of our minds, we question that surely it is better to be out in the open. But at the moment, things have got to be indoors. And not only that, air cons are said to be a no-no. You know, you got to open the windows, get ventilation. So the only saving grace, I would say, is that we got almost 2 months before school reopens, if it's allowed to reopen at the end of August. And a lot of water can pass under that bridge. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are things we cannot do, and however much we want to be inventive, if social distancing is the norm, how much further can you go? Especially with young children. So I think for the time being, we will just have to put it on the back burner and get updated from time to time and immediately respond as things get better, with the hope that in the not too distant future, things will get back, well, supposedly the new normal. We may no longer shake hands, but a lot of the old normal may remain.
We hope so, yeah. Yeah, not everybody can do as much social distancing as we are doing at the moment here. Nobody can accuse us of anything, I think. Good. We do not have any new questions, I think, from the audience. So any additional comments from you, Rami?
Yes, thank you, Frank. Back to the social distancing. I also totally agree with Danny. We will know more over time. The MOE will be clearer over time. We will know our solutions. We have to test them. Our approach at ISKL is start with heightened measures, assess, and then make decisions later whether, we want to start more than the required measures and then ease it over time, because there is a lot of new learning for everyone. Students, we have markings on the floor everywhere, which doors to use to enter, which doors to use to exit, from the thermal scanning. There is so much learning that needs to happen, and we can't really open the school day one with everyone on campus. Even if it's allowed, it will be phased in over a few days to make sure we're building capacity, we're doing learning, we're keeping everyone safe. However, there is really a tricky challenge. Like the school, in terms of facilities, SOP, you can put everything in place. But given that learning is social enterprise, given that if you have 3, 4, 5-year-old kids to tell them to stay apart, how much policing is required? We know the teacher has also to teach. Will it be effective? What is the right balance between acceptable risk and really, like, you don't want the campus learning experience to be inferior to e-learning. If we wrap every child in plastic and put them in corners and don't move, maybe they're better off in an e-learning environment. I'm exaggerating here, of course, but I think schools will know more as we assess how it's working over time and find solutions to that new norm.
I think there will also be a lot of learning from other countries, and that's where international schools again could play a role, because I know, sitting here in Denmark, the first students that were allowed into school was the primary kids. It's completely opposite to what we're doing in Malaysia. And I mean, that's more than a month ago now that schools opened in Denmark, and there has been no bad consequences of it. So I think it's also time that we are starting to get some factual evidence from other countries what can actually be done in terms of the speed and way of opening. Okay. Datu, do you have anything else on mind, on your heart, that you would like to share with us?
Well, I think the social distancing is the big imperative going forward. And so long as there's no vaccine And if you believe what the epidemiologists say, certainly not for the next year, or at least late 2021, social distancing will be something, or rather physical distancing will be something, will be part of our lives for at least the next year, year and a half. So the question for schools mainly is, how big can your classrooms be? I think that's the most, everything else can be managed, coming in, going in, one-way traffic, staggering arrivals, staggering departures, but the classroom, how many children can you have? Fortunately for international schools, we have small classes. Like in our case, we'll basically move from about 20 to 25 max. Yeah. And we have looked at the SOP and discovered that the maximum number of children we can have in the bigger classes is 21. Classroom is big enough for that. Yeah. And the smaller classes, maximum 18, which means to say that if we have year groups that are not in convenient numbers, yeah, we may need to have an additional one class, which means you need to find teaching resources, which also involves new costs, which will not be paid for. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there was talk. People are asking whether schools should stagger their operating hours. Yeah, there's something that's been asked, and we have thought about that. And if you consider that in a regular international school, where classes start from 8:30 to 3:30, there's not much room for staggered. So the only way we can think about it is at the lower end, nursery and reception, where I think the teachers and the teaching assistants may not have an easy time dealing with 3, 4, 5-year-olds having to be basically seated in the same rooted spot for hours on end. So maybe there could be an experiment starting with the lower end, where children may have to come in 2-3 hours max, and then they have to leave. And then the second class will do 2-3 hours. One of the big issues coming out of this will be the desanitizing, because the moment one classroom leaves, the whole class and the tables, the chairs, the books and everything else have to be desanitized, and that will take some time. And then you have to get ready. And it all depends now on how many hours are you going to expect from your teaching staff, who already we know are laboring under this very difficult concept of delivering teaching online. Some of our teachers tell us they spend 12, 13 hours a day preparing and then delivering and then recovering, recording, and discussing with children. So this is actually a big issue arising, and it looks like staggering may not be the answer, may not well be the answer. So having said all that, and as we're coming to a close, I think we need to be positive about everything else and say, hey, let's have a good crisis and let's not spoil it, which basically means that let's learn from what we are doing now and see how we can get out of this. And I'm really very happy to hear what Mr. Rami Madani said, because there are a lot of things he mentioned that are basically very important for teaching staff and school management going forward. So let's not waste this crisis. Let's get on with things as they stand. Let's try to do better for our children, for our stakeholders, and try to give them the value they expect of international schools. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Datu. Last comment, Rami?
I was just enjoying listening to Dato Danny and not thinking. But
That's good.
I have also to echo what he said. It's a journey of learning. And I think for leaders, two things are important: realism and optimism. One cannot be alone. The optimism gives us hope and way forward, and realism gives us data, information. Be honest with what's happening around you. I do believe that our best assets are our teachers. So we need to look at the sustainability aspect in any model we do. To what extent is it sustainable without them, being unwell or collapse or anything? These are our assets. And we do need to keep the pulse on the ground as we are practically what we will be doing, we will be ideating. We will be just troubleshooting and assessing constantly. But as we make these decisions, we need to really be mindful of their impact on everyone around us, learn from them, and move forward, move ahead. So my last word is really a word of appreciation for you, Frank, for Dato, and for the MICCI for that opportunity to have this conversation. And we hope that the audience took something out of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rami. So just on a very quick wrap up, I think we have discovered in our discussion that there are a few things that are a little bit out of our control, and we hope that we can get a bit of help with. That's on the standing operated procedures from the MOE. It is also from the immigration department to help us at least to get the teachers and students and parents into the country so that we can work with as much as possible. On our own side, there's a lot of opportunities in this crisis if we are flexible and agile in adapting to it and making structures that are flexible and ready to learn from the experience that we are being put into. Finally, we had a bit of discussion also on how international schools can actually be leaders in helping national schools in Malaysia to evolve both around testing and around e-learning in general. So with that in mind and with this experience, thank you very much to my fellow speakers. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I will hereby hand it back to Priscilla.
Thank you, Frank. It was you were very good. You must have woken up very early this morning just to be with us. Yeah, looks like the weather is quite nice over there. Thank you, our speakers, Dato Denny, Mr. Rami. Thank you, everybody on Facebook for tuning in, and I hope it was a very informative session for all of you. Our next session will be on the 9th of July with the topic on personal data protection, how to protect your data. And we'll be having more webinar sessions over the coming months to see how it goes. In the meantime, all of you, please stay safe, stay healthy, and let's fight this pandemic together. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Safe journey home, Frank.